On January 21st of this year, officers Jason Rivera and Wilbert Mora of the New York City Police Department were gunned down while responding to a domestic disturbance between a mother and her son. After the son shot the two responding officers, he attempted to flee the scene before being shot and killed by a third officer. Being just one incident in a string of police shootings this year, I sat down with retired New York City police officer Gus Cabarcas to discuss what he believes really happened to these unsuspecting officers. Additionally, he gives us some very candid opinions about how it felt to walk that thin line between the good people and the evil ones, and he also touched on the biggest threat to policing today. A Colombian immigrant who learned English by watching children's shows on TV, he also served in the Army before becoming a police officer. Man, I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. It was a really good one.
From Carry the Load, these are lessons from the front. Stories of service and sacrifice from our military, veterans, first responders, and their families.
Let's just jump into it, Gus.
Let's do it.
So Gus, I would have said New Yorker just because of the accent, but you're actually the Colombian by way of New York, into Texas.
Yes, sir.
So your parents came here from Colombia, you said. Were you born here or were you born in Colombia?
No, I was born in Colombia. I'm originally from a coastal city in Colombia. It's Cartagena.
Okay.
So I was born there, came to New York. We settled in Queens, New York. This is in 1978.
Which is a lot different than a coastal town in Colombia.
Yes. Got here in December, winter, never saw snow in my life, first time. And I remember arriving at LaGuardia Airport. My mother was like, you have to bundle up. So she sits me up, puts a hood over my head, and I looked like that kid from Christmas Story. Couldn't see where I was going. Got settled in New York at that time. Didn't know how to speak English. So my first summer here, the way I learned how to speak English was watching Electric Company, Sesame Street.
Really?
That's how I learned how to speak English.
And you were how old?
I was 7 years old.
Okay. And you said this was 78.
78, yeah.
Okay.
Going back.
78-ish.
8, 9
Okay.
years old, yeah.
And anyone who was alive during that time remembers the Medellin, really into the 80s, remembers the Medellin cartel. Yes. And Pablo Escobar, which is a fascinating story to study. And I actually remember went out with a girl in high school whose family left because of that. They left Bogota.
Okay.
Did your parents, were they fleeing anything like that, or were they just coming to
No, they just wanted
a better life and just got out in time? What was the...
So where we used to live, it wasn't really affecting us at that time. Mm-hmm. My parents wanted a better life, obviously, for us and for them.
Okay.
And listen, this country is a great country of opportunity. You could be whatever you want to be. Mm-hmm. And like I said, we settled in Queens. At that time, the neighborhood was predominantly Irish, Italian, so it was a mix. Mm-hmm. Lived in a 4-story apartment. We didn't have the luxuries that I have now with my family, but it was a simple life. My father started as a dishwasher. Fast forward, he retired from one of the biggest unions in New York City, So when I hear people tell me that this country is, there's no opportunities here, there is, just got to grab them. You got to work for them.
And the perspective that you and your family have obviously is very different because y'all were, you came to this country specifically for opportunity, whereas somebody like me was born in this country, doesn't understand anything different. Mm-hmm. Unless I make it a point to get involved in something that opens my eyes to that, or, join the Marine Corps as I did and travel the world and see, oh my God, we've got it pretty good.
Very good.
So, and the reason I was asking the question about why they left is I didn't know if that served as a platform for your service in the Army and then on to
the reason
law enforcement.
When I was 17, I didn't want to go to college. And for me, joining the Army, the U.S. Army was a way for me to give back to this great nation.
Mm-hmm.
Since, they gave my parents, myself, my brothers so much. It's like, hey, let me join the Army. The time I didn't know what I was getting into, but best thing I did. Joined the Army. I, stationed here and went through basic, went to AIT in Fort Sam Houston.
AIT would be Advanced Infantry Training?
And training. Advanced Individual Training.
Advanced Individual Training,
yes.
Okay.
In the Army.
Y'all got weird names in the Army.
In the Army, yeah, I know. And then ended up stationed in Fort Hood. I was a medic assigned to an Army unit. I was with the famous 2nd Army Division, Hell on Wheels.
Really?
Which in World War II, General Patton was famous.
Yeah.
I was with that unit. We were the only unit in the Army at the time that we wore our patch over our heart. Everyone else wore it on their shoulder. So
yeah. I did not know that.
Yep. Second Army Division, Hell on Wheels.
Okay, so 2nd Armored Division wore their patch over their heart rather than on their sleeve. That I was never aware of that. So that's what I love about doing this, is because sometimes I learn things that I just never even thought about.
Yeah.
So, all right, so you were a medic in the Army, and then after you left the Army, you went back to New York.
I went back to New York. Yeah, I joined the New York Army National Guard, and while I was still on active duty, I took the exam for the New York City Police Department. Totally forgot about it. Went back to New York. I started working for United Parcel Service. Did that for about 2.5 years. I was driving for them. Fast forward to 1992. You get a letter from the New York City Police Department. Hey, you interested? Went through the whole process. And in January 13th of 1992, I joined the, at the time there was 3 separate police departments in New York.
Mm-hmm.
You had the New York City Transit Police, you had the New York City Police Department, and then you had the New York City Housing Police Department. So the New York City Transit Police Department was responsible for the subway in New York City.
And that's it, just the subway.
Just the subway, and we had part of this, some of the street areas.
Okay.
So, of course, with my luck, I was online. There was another gentleman in front of me. He chose the NYPD. I was getting ready to choose the NYPD, and either you have a choice, either New York City Transit or New York City Housing. I was like, you know what? Let me go to the New York City Transit Police. So went through the academy, 6 months, and then we had an additional 3 weeks with the New York City Transit Police, and then started working. I started working at District 1, which was 59th Street, Columbus Circle. I used to work 8 at night to 4 in the morning, patrolling the subways. I was a 26-year-old. You want to see, how they say things happen after midnight?
Nothing good happens after midnight, you mean?
Oh, yeah.
My kids have heard that expression a time or two.
And if there's a full moon out there, watch out.
Really? Okay, yeah. So 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. That
in the morning.
That I'm sure there's some really good stories there. Before we get into any, what any of those stories might be and any of your experience there, I actually want to back up a little bit, or fast forward, if you will, to just a few months ago, and in New York City, obviously a well-publicized shooting.
Yes.
And for those who aren't aware, I can set at a layman term the scenario. Mother and son were squabbling. She calls the police, said it's not an emergency, but I've got some concerns about my son. He's threatened me. I've just come off of a medical issue or procedure. They show up. Health and welfare check is the way I understood it. You have two brand new
They were
officers.
brand new officers, yes.
And the experience one only had about 4 years, as I understand it. They check. Short of the long is they check on the mom. The mom's okay, but she asked them to check on the son. Goes back into his room. He comes out, opens fire. Both of these young officers are killed. One that night died of his wounds. The other a few days later. When you saw all that, what was going through your mind? What popped into your world that had been maybe suppressed from your time on the streets?
You know, I've been retired now. I'm coming up on 10 years. Retired in 2012. And my phone, I was at an event with my wife. My phone started blowing up. Hey, did you hear about the 2 officers in the 3-2 precinct that were ambushed? And it always goes back to, hey, that could have been me. Because I was put in those type of situations. You know, always you get a domestic dispute, you get a radio run of a domestic dispute, you get there. I spoke to one of the chiefs that responded to that scene, which at the time we were both cop sergeants together. And I spoke to him a few weeks later, and he saw these 2 officers were wearing body cams. And he basically told me they were executed. And to me, you know, I think the mother should have warned when she called 911. Should have told him, hey, my son has a gun. And it turned out he had several guns.
Okay, what's interesting about that, though, is according to the reports that I read, you know, and a lot of this is media, you know, related. I obviously don't have access to some of the things you would have access to. She knew that he had a gun when he was in Baltimore. And when he moved to New York, as the reports go, she said, you are not to bring any guns with you. Now, whether or not that's the truth, nobody knows. And so, you know, as a parent, it's easy to side with her and say, I believe her, because you tell your child to do something and you expect them to do it. And then you don't necessarily inspect what you expect. You just expect them to follow through with what they told you they would do.
Right.
But when you tell me that they were essentially ambushed and the body cam says that they were executed, that's a whole different level. Yeah. I mean, it almost sounds like there could have been some knowledge on her part.
I think she knew. I mean, I wasn't there at the scene, but from speaking to a good friend of mine that saw that video, I mean, not that they were set up, but she could have warned. I mean, when she made that initial phone call to 911, she could have said, hey, my son is known to carry guns in the past. That could have, you know, maybe alert these 2 officers and maybe get some other units there. So in the NYPD, we have a specialized unit. It's called Emergency Service Unit. And if you know that there's someone that has a gun that's barricaded, usually take a step back, wait for backup. They're a SWAT, basically.
Right.
So, and, you know, I don't want to Monday night quarterback these 2 officers, but like I said, it was maybe the times now, you know, where they're like, hopefully they didn't second guess themselves. You know, they went there with the right attitude, you know, the right mindset. Hey,
they went there to help.
They went there to help. That's all they went there. And they basically got executed. I mean, they got ambushed and they got executed. That's how I look at things.
It's, yeah. And you know, when you start talking about all that stuff, I mean, whether you're on the side of the police officer or whether you're on the side of someone who has been harmed, whether justly or unjustly by a police officer, everything is so polarized now in that regard. I mean, I keep looking at this going, God bless these young men and women who ignore all of that. And they have somewhat of an idealistic approach and say, I get all that, but I can still make a difference.
I mean, I look at these young officers nowadays, and yeah, when I came on in 1992, New York, that was pretty much the crime was starting to started to go down. But there was still a lot of crime going on. But back then, we were allowed to do our jobs. Where now, politicians, Like I used to tell someone like, hey, I couldn't come and tell a doctor how to do his performance surgery. I never went to school for that. But it seems like everyone, general public, hey, well, cop should do this. You know, oh, why did the cop, how come the cop doesn't shoot that gun out of his hands? Listen, I'm not John Wayne. So, and that's what I try to explain to people. I mean, even family members that when I became a police officer, just for the mere fact that I joined the NYPD, the other thing was, well, you know, all you guys do is stop Black and Hispanics. That was, I'm looking at myself, I'm like, okay, Hispanic. Go, where are you going with that? And I like to tell people, listen, New York City is predominantly Black and Hispanic. You know, you get robbed. I don't care if you're Black, white, Hispanic, yellow. I get to the scene, you're going to ask me, first thing I'm going to ask you, hey, who robbed you, sir? There's a male, Black, you know, whatever.
I need you to describe him so that I know who to look for.
Who to look for. It's common sense. It's police work 101. If you tell me it's a male Hispanic, okay, I'm not going to go look for male white. You know, so it's just, but they've gotten away from that because everything is, it's polarized. You know, it's breaking. And like, you got to realize in New York, you have, when you say Hispanics, you have Colombians, you got Ecuadorians, you got Peruvians, you got every nationality, okay? Colombians come in all colors and sizes. Dominicans come in all, so I laugh because, you know, the media just...
Yeah, we want to want to compartmentalize everyone, and, you know, now more than ever, that can't be done. No. I mean, I even had, you know, like the 23andMe, somebody in my family did that. It's entirely possible that I've got some African descent in me, you know, based on there. And I'm like, I don't really look like I would have African descent.
If my kids were to walk in, if my daughter was to walk into the studio right now, like, that's your daughter? So that was like the biggest joke when she was born. You know, cops, we always joke around. They were like, hey, who's the father? Was it the UPS guy, the mailman? I'm like, all good. Yes, it's my daughter. So it's
gotta have thick skin in our
world. Yeah. It's
So tell me about how, when you saw that, tell me how that compared to when you were walking the beat or your service in general.
I mean, it brought me right back. I mean, and you always think back, and I think every police officer thinks like that, where, hey, that could have been me. You know, every time I left for work, the one thing my wife, you know, when I got married, my wife and I, no matter how mad, if we could have had an argument before I left for work, we would always say, hey, love you, I'll see you in the morning. You know, we never, and then I would get to work, give her a call, hey, I'm here, I'll speak to you in the morning. That just brings back, like, that could have been me, you know. Would I maybe done things differently? But you don't want a Monday night quarterback. You know, these two officers. I mean, it's just.
Did you ever get to a point where you felt like it's about to be me?
Yeah. Oh, I was there. I was put in those situations many times, but I keep saying somebody was looking down on me. I think the big man upstairs, my mother. You know. Because it came to those situations where it got close, but it never got to the point where, was I shot at? No, but it came, you know.
Well, okay, so you were never shot at then, which in a 21-year New York City career, is that
well
normal? Is that just fortunate?
Depending. We responded to like. Of jobs, you know, shots fired. Mm-hmm. We would get there and you would hear the shots in the background, but never, and I was very fortunate, you know. I was also very fortunate that I was never injured on the job. You know, I had, yes, little broken hand and stuff like that.
Right.
But nothing, like I said, in my 21-year career, I saw many police officers that got killed, others that were maimed during, you know, car accidents, or, I mean, I was working one year where an officer got hit, they threw a bucket of spackle off a roof, got hit in the head, killed. Yeah, we call it airmail in New York. They threw it off a building.
Intentionally.
Intentionally, yes.
And do you feel like the police officer that we're talking about was targeted?
Yeah.
Or he just happened to be the one
He
there?
was targeted because of his uniform, what he stood for, you know. And that's, we were like a magnet, basically. We were like the line between good and evil.
So how do you, in good conscience and good attitude, go into the office, which is a 4-dimensional world around you every day, and say, these people, there are some people here that appreciate this, but this guy spits on me and that guy, spits on me and she doesn't care. How do you in good conscience do that?
You put that behind you, and then you identify the people that want you there. Listen, the bad people are always going to hate you because what you stood for. Even the people that gave me the hardest time was my own. I was called a sellout. I was called the white devil. Many times we're like, hey, you're out of uniform. What do you mean you're out of? Because you forgot your white hood. I was compared to the KKK. So
because you're standing for law and order.
Yeah. So you laugh. The job, when I say the job, that's a term that in the NYPD we all use. The job makes you very cynical. After a while, it's like, okay, what makes sense doesn't make sense. So, and I mean, but you learn from it.
Okay. So give me the privileged white guy. And of course I have very hot sports opinions about that. But there's no question that I was born into a world that I didn't have much for one. Absolutely readily admit that. I am absolutely fortunate given the world that I was born into.
Okay.
And when I hear stuff like that, it makes me think, well, what in the world do they want? And when they being the ones that are critical of you for putting yourself in danger to protect anyone, regardless of their background, what would they prefer? That no one does anything and we just revert to anarchy?
And you brought up a good point, because the NYPD is the most diversified police department in the country.
Yes.
Okay. We have every nationality. So when I was a supervisor, I had...
And if I'm not mistaken, not to cut you off, but the last time there was a legitimate ambush, that was an Asian cop, if I'm not mistaken.
The two officers that were just ambushed, both, one was Dominican, the other one of Puerto Rican descent. Not that it matters. Listen, we're all Americans.
Absolutely.
The officer that ended up shooting the perp, he was from, I believe he's Indian, of Asian descent.
Of India.
From India, yeah.
Wow.
Which is crazy. So when I was a supervisor in the NYPD, I have an officer of Chinese descent who spoke Mandarin. I had another one that spoke Cantonese. I had a gay officer. I had a Jamaican officer. I had a Puerto Rican officer. I had Irish. I had Italian. So we laugh. I mean, I used, when people say, "Oh, the NYPD is the most racist department," like, what are you talking about? At one time, the NYPD, just to please the community, they transfer. There was an incident in the 7-0 precinct in Brooklyn South where they transfer a whole bunch of African American officers because they wanted to please the community, and they were forced there to go work there. A lot of them didn't want to work in the area. So it doesn't. To me, it's just.
And that area was a
predominantly
black.
Yeah. You have Haitian, Jamaicans.
Okay.
But it doesn't matter. People always, oh, well, if we have officers that look like us, they would listen. You break the law, you break the law. I don't care what color you are.
Sure.
If you rob somebody, for example, many times, I would get to the scene when I was a police officer. Guy happened to be Hispanic. The first thing he would say to me, hey, man, bro, you're one of us. I'm like, I'm not one of you. I go, I don't go around shooting people or robbing people. So how can I be? So, and they would try to use that line on you. Or you did this to me because you pulled me over because I was Hispanic. I'm like, no, you just went through a red light. You almost hit that person over there. That's the reason why. Or the reason why I pulled you over was because your license plates are missing. You have a broken tail light, but they don't want to hear that. They don't want to be accountable for their actions.
Accountability.
Accountability. That's all what it comes down to.
You talked about how thankless of a position it can be. Tell me about a time, though, where you said it's worth it.
Man, I was working in the 10th precinct, which is the west side of Manhattan. It's called Chelsea, that section of the west side. I was working at 4 to 12, basically working 4 p.m. till midnight. I just happened to be covering another shift. We used to have these SRO, single room occupancy hotels for homeless people. We get a run of a gentleman on the rooftop of this building. He wanted to jump off the building. I get there. My partner's with me at the time. We get up to the roof. So he's standing on the ledge. So, and I'm trying to describe it. So here's a wall. He's standing on the other side of that wall. Basically, he's about 7 stories high. Talking to the gentleman, I go, hey, what's going on? Now, the whole time he was facing me. I'm speaking to him. Basically, he wanted to kill himself because he just found out he was HIV positive. This is 1997, 98. Talking to him, I told my partner, I go, hey, do you have emergency services unit coming here? He goes, yeah, I just called them. I could hear him on the radio, see if they could set up an airbag. So keep talking to the gentleman, and I'm telling him, hey, man, it's not that bad. Listen, don't do it, whatever. So he just gave me this look that he goes, I'm going. He basically starts turning around, facing down towards the street. I looked at my partner. I go, hey, he's going. As he was starting to go, leaning forward, I jump over this wall, grab him. My partner grabs me by my gun belt. Now, he's leaning halfway out. I'm holding on to him.
He was going. There was no...
I looked at my partner. I said some expletive words. I go, hey, pull me back. And he was, pretty, guy worked out. He pulled both of us back. The words, hugged the guy. I said, hey, man. Hey, he was apologizing to me. Hey, I almost took you. I said, hey, it's all good. So that's what, and that was like a routine job for us.
Isn't that interesting, though, that it now turns around and he starts apologizing to you?
Yeah. And it kills me because people, cops are, they're racist, they're this and that. A week later, I'm doing a protest, which is crazy. It was.
And when you say doing a protest, you mean working the event to keep the protesters?
Yeah, I'm working this protest, and I was called. It was, which is ironically brings me back to the story. The guy, he was gay, but the protest I was being called, cops are homophobic and all that. I'm like, hey, well, last week, I just saved this guy, and I didn't do it for the money. I didn't do it for the glory. It was just part of the job.
So, I mean, hold on. There's so much to unpack there, Gus. Okay, so this guy is, I mean, there was no, it wasn't a ruse of any kind. He was going.
He was going, yeah.
And had you not done what you did and your partner not been able to grab your
me.
belt and,
Yep.
and hold both of you, he was dead.
Yeah.
And so because of your actions, this guy who thinks the world is over because he had contracted HIV,
Mm-hmm.
now turns around to you and says, I'm sorry I put you in that position.
Yeah.
And then a week later, you're actually protecting the right of people to protest under the Constitution.
Yeah.
And they're telling you how bad you are.
Yeah, I'm a racist. I'm a homophobic.
You know, golly. I mean, okay, so I can take that in a lot of different ways, but I want you to tell me what you in back-to-back weeks, you saw extremes happening.
Yeah, two extremes.
What did you walk away with? What goes through your mind about people, about life at that point?
There's a lot of uninformed people. They see everything through a lens, and listen, I don't know everything, but you have to open up your mind. Yeah, it's just crazy.
So if your daughter walked through the door right now
mm-hmm.
and she said, you're trying to give her the condensed version of what she needs to take away from this very thing, what are you telling her?
I always tell my daughter, treat people the way you want to be treated.
Just the simple golden rule.
Simple golden rule. Okay, I don't care if the gentleman there that's mowing a lawn, the same way you speak to that gentleman that's mowing a lawn, you speak to the CEO of a huge, large company. And people have told me that, hey, Gus, you don't change. You're the same. You could be talking to, simple homeless person the same way you speak to, obviously, depending on the situation. But it's just, I treat everybody the same. I don't care what color you are. Listen, and I had this thing in the NYPD, if you're a piece of garbage, you're a piece of garbage. If you're a straight shooter, we're going to get along fine. And I always treated people like, it's always worked for me. I mean, 55 years, you knock on wood.
So what's interesting about that is that, you were talking earlier, and we've got these colors that everyone is associated with, white and black and brown and yellow. No one's golden.
No.
Why not? Shouldn't that be what we're striving towards, is the golden rule and getting everybody to be golden people?
Listen, we all bleed the same. We all going to end up in the same spot, either buried or, depending on what your choices are. But, we're not here forever. We're here for a very short time in this world. I've been very fortunate. I mean, I've seen a lot of friends, and I've seen a lot of death in the police department. I've seen, 18-year-old kid overdose. At the time it was, back then it was ecstasy. We had all these clubs, and mother shows up.
Were you a dad at that point?
No, I was not a dad yet. This kid basically, we're working in the 10th precinct on the west side of Manhattan. We had this club called the Tunnel. At that time, ecstasy was huge. And it was pouring rain. You know how it rained here last Monday?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it was 1 o'clock in the morning. My partner and I were driving, and I see someone laying on the sidewalk. And I go, tell my partner, hey, name was Mark. I go, hey, Mark, stop for a minute. There's a kid laying there on the street. Get out of the car. Try to, shake him. Nothing. We call EMS, we call the ambulance. Ambulance shows up. They start working on him. Okay. They take his temperature. It was 108. That was his body temperature. We knew where the kid was. He was inside of this club, the Tunnel. And what happened was this kid OD'd on ecstasy. And he did it inside of the club. What they did, we found out later on, they dragged him out of the club. They threw him outside like if he was garbage. Okay. So now the detectives show up. We had to notify his parents. This kid lived outside of New York City. He lived out in Long Island, where I used to live, out in St. James. Detectives get in touch with the mom. The mom thought he was down the street with his friends for a sleepover. So this kid was 60 miles away at a nightclub. And what's crazy was you would have parents dropping off their kids at these, they used to call them rave parties. And, we're standing there, And we would ask the parents, I go, hey, you know what you're dropping your kid off here for? He goes, oh, it's a rave party. He's non-alcoholic. I'm like, yeah, but there's plenty of drugs. People are clueless. And we were just like, okay. We knew what was going on inside. And, but yeah, that was back then. That was, around 1997, 98. Ecstasy was huge. All these kids.
That has to be hard to see.
Yeah.
Young kids like that throw their lives away.
Yep. And, New York is a city that never sleeps. I mean, so like I told you before, I used to work nights. I used to see the people going home from working all day, and then you had the other crew, like we used to call them, that would just come out up, to do things that were, up to no good. And you could tell,
Something you said just triggered this thought. Did you ever, the guy that you saved from jumping off the building, is that the last time you ever saw him or heard anything about him?
Yeah, never, and that was, like I said, that was one incident. I had another one, just came back. This is when I was working in the subway. This is at 42nd and 8th Avenue. Like around 3 o'clock in the morning. Keep hearing this, someone like just, it was a woman's voice. And now, have you ever been to the subway in New York where you got to go buy the tokens?
Sure.
So she was laying around the back of the, where they sell the tokens, right? So my partner and I, we break up. We go on one side of the token booth. Looked around. She was going into labor.
Oh, my goodness.
Okay. At the time, that was when crack was the big hit. So she was giving birth. So, we get the ambulance there. And
the implication by what you said is that she was a crack addict.
She was a crack addict. But she was so high. As we put her on the stretcher, we got the, she gave birth. She was more worried about her sneakers than, she didn't realize that she just had given birth. So you asked me if I ever went back to the people that, with her I did. Those kids, she had twins. She gave birth to twins that day in the subway, literally on the floor.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. This is in 1994. So 2 days later, I wanted to say, hey, let me see how these kids are doing. So I went by the hospital, and she was still, she was coming down from her high, but she didn't realize that, she just given birth to two. And I always think, I go, how did those kids turn out? That always, and I'm sure I'm not the only police officer that's been through situations like that. But you always wonder, hey, whatever happened? Just like you asked me before, did you ever get back? No, but I always wonder what happened to that person.
That's an unclosed loop.
Unclosed loop, yeah.
Of your job, or of your career as a police officer. I would think that it would be a lot more rewarding if you knew the positive outcomes, or just the outcome.
The outcome, yeah. And listen, we don't do it for the money. We don't do it for the glory. It's just a job. Job that, unfortunately, it's gotten a bad rap. Yeah, listen, maybe in the past it was, well, like everything else, time changes. And if I had to do it all over again, I mean, yeah, I would do it. I mean, it was a job. It provided for my family.
Yeah, but it's much more than a job. It's a very noble profession.
That is why
you swore an oath.
Oath.
And that's the difference between, in my opinion, I mean, and I'm gonna challenge you on that, because I don't think it's just a job. When you take an oath, as a doctor does, as a lawyer does, as someone in the military, as a police officer, that's a big difference. That's not just a job. Yeah. That's a commitment.
That's a commitment, and it's listen, you could take someone's life, which is, I was very fortunate I never had to do that. Came to close to some situations like that, but it's a tough job. I mean, the divorce rate, suicides.
Yes.
I mean, listen, my wife and I, we've been happily married coming up on 29 years. That's unheard of in law enforcement. I mean, they're out there, but it's, and everyone thinks
and you should be commended for that. You should be congratulated for that. I mean, you two are, like you said, I mean, that's an anomaly.
No. And everyone thinks, just like, with the veterans, everyone thinks of the veteran, but they don't think of the spouses.
Could not agree with you more.
Listen, like I said, I'm not the man that I'm without my wife. She is, I mean, hasn't been a perfect marriage. I mean, listen, we have our arguments like everyone else, but, we met on a blind date Friday the 13th, March of 1992. And we've been together ever since.
That is awesome.
Yeah, it's crazy because even among Hispanics, okay, everyone thinks that racism only is between black and whites, okay? Hispanics, okay? Puerto Ricans don't like Dominicans don't like this one, Colombians don't like Puerto Ricans and all that. And I always say, I'm never going to marry a Puerto Rican. Never going to marry a Puerto Rican. You know what?
You married a Puerto Rican.
Married a Puerto Rican. So it's, it's crazy.
Well, again, I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and I've known you from afar for a while, and now it's nice to be able to sit down and have this conversation.
A couple of years, yeah.
But what?
Got a little thing here for you, Todd.
Oh, okay.
I got a little gift. I know you were a Mustang in the Marine Corps.
That's right. Well, guess what? I got one too. Just in case you were trying to throw this on the table and get a drink.
All right,
sir.
Look at that. Well, here.
Okay, well, you just one-up me with the patch.
All right. No, it's all good.
Here, I'll let you go first.
All right, there you go. The coin from the New York City Sergeants. Man, thank you. Ah, very nice. See?
That is awesome.
Yeah.
I've got a good coin collection, but I didn't have one from the New York Police Department. So this is awesome. Thank you.
No, you're welcome, man. Thank you for having me. I mean, hey, this is like very therapeutic for me, when people ask me, hey, about my background and all that, because, listen, this country, especially what's going on nowadays, you got to be very proud of this country. I mean, look at me. I'm, parents came here legally. The so-called system that everyone complains about, system worked for me. I'm a product of New York City public schools. I mean,
we ain't perfect, but it ain't as bad as it could be.
No, listen, I tell everyone that has been born in this country, you need to go out of this country, not on vacation, not to a resort, whatever. Go live there for a couple and let me know how that works. You know it and I know it.
Yes.
So, but man.
Well, who are you going to be carrying this year on the trail?
Okay, I always carry. Obviously, every New York City Police Department has been killed, the line of duty. But one especially, his name is James McNaughton. He was the first NYPD officer killed in Iraq. So James, everybody calls him Jim. He was from Long Island, New York. He volunteered. He was in Iraq. He was an MP with the Army. Volunteered. He was killed by a sniper. His parents are both retired New York City police officers who I used to work with, Billy and his wife Michelle. So every Memorial Day I remember James McNaughton. Like I said, the NYPD is it's a family, obviously every police officer, but specifically the NYPD and specifically James McNaughton, Staff Sergeant. He was a police officer with the NYPD.
Well, thank you for sharing with us Jimmy's story. Gus, thanks, man.
No,
really thoroughly enjoyed it.
This was good.